Now, guys, listen to me. If we are going to do justice at all, if we are going to do justice in trying to understand this, we should probably try to understand why these assumptions and why these judgments come from. Where do they come from? In other words, how do they come into being? Jimmy. Everyone say Jimmy? No. Everyone say Jimmy? Jimmy chooses not to play or become friends with Johnny, because Johnny is that boy who actually lives down on the other side of the tracks. And Jimmy heard from his dad. He's heard from his dad 1,000 times how crummy the people are on the other side of the tracks. Now let me ask you this question before I go on. Jimmy is only 7 years old. He's only 7 years old. Is Jimmy at fault? Is he at fault because of the assumptions or the judgments that he has towards Johnny? Because the truth is, guys, I think that's a pretty tough question, isn't it? And it is kind of hard to fault a 7-year-old little boy for the sins of his father. But let's compound this scenario a little further. As Jimmy gets older, he hears about how 80%, someone tells him, 80% of the theft, 80% of the drug abuse, and 80% of the violence in this town comes from that area down on the other side of the tracks. And then Jimmy one day hears how his friend Eric, who just turned 16 and got a job delivering pizzas, he heard that while his friend Eric was down on the other side of the tracks, he got robbed while delivering this pizza. All of this further painting an image, right? Painting an image in Jimmy's mind as to the people who live down on the other side of the tracks. Now in reality is important, right? Because you hear me say all the time, Lord, help us to have eyes to see things for as they really are and not just how they are perceived, right? So reality is important. Correct, church? Come on, somebody say amen. If you need to stand up, I don't care, you can stand up. In reality, it's less than 5% of the people who live down on the other side of the tracks who are causing all of these problems. But even if Jimmy knew that, even if he knew that, all of these things that he's experienced and has heard and all of this stuff probably won't really change his perspective. Let me paint another scenario for you to consider. If you go just down the road here to the Humane Society here in Noblesville, just up the road, you will find today about 24 dogs looking to be adopted. Now, let me ask you, how many different common breeds of dogs do you think there are in the Midwest? At least a dozen, maybe 24, maybe more, right? And yet, I'm telling you, over 80% of the dogs right over here at the Humane Society are either pit bulls or Rottweilers or mixtures thereof. Why? Why do you think that is the case? Guys, people don't want to adopt these kinds of dogs. And so they just remain there. And there become more and more and more and more of them. Why? Why is that? Because they have heard. People have heard. Everyone say the word heard. People have heard and have become convinced. Everyone say the word convinced. Now listen to me. People have heard and people have become convinced that these kinds of dogs are dangerous. They're dangerous. But more powerful than words are what? Experiences. Experiences. The other day I drove down to Fisher's to pick up a small tiller for the church garden, which we bought. By the way, we have a new tiller for the church, a small one. It's going to be great. Matthew went with me. He was in the truck with me, and we also had little Pebbles with us in the car as well. And when we got to the house where we were picking up the tiller, this little girl saw us through the storm door, and she screamed, "Mommy, Mommy, it's a little puppy dog," right? And the mom came to the door, and she opened the door, and there was Pebbles sitting there on the ground, wagging her tail profusely, and the little girl went nuts petting her. Can you picture that in your mind? But then her little brother came to the door, and he saw Pebbles, and his response was 180 degrees different. He hollered, then he turned around, and he ran back into the house. The little boy's dad caught him, picked him up, and brought him back to the door. And then he says to me, sorry. He had a bad experience with a dog. And now even a little puppy will scare him. And then he turns to the little boy and he says to him, now son, remember, not all doggies are bad. Most little doggies are good, and they are loving. The fact is, the little boy's first experience with a dog was getting bit by a dog. He got gotten bit by a dog. And despite his dad's words, that little boy was going to have absolutely nothing to do with Pebbles. Cute little innocent Pebbles. Why, guys? Why? He had an experience. And unfortunately, it was not a good experience, but instead was a bad experience. And it left an impression. When I went to Greenville College, now Greenville University, halfway between Effingham and St. Louis, I remember hearing again and again and again about how dangerous it is in East St. Louis, which, by the way, is a very discriminatory statement. Was it true? One day I found out just how true it was. One day a girl and I drove from the campus of Greenville to St. Louis to go to the zoo. They have an awesome free zoo in St. Louis. And then we went to the Arch, and we finally ended up at the train station. And then on the way back to Greenville, I wanted to drive by the new racetrack that they had just built where the Indy cars would end up racing. But somehow or another, I got turned around. We didn't have phones with GPSs back then. And the reality was, guys, about 10 minutes later, I knew that I was in trouble, big trouble. While driving down one of the roads trying to find the highway, I come to a stoplight, and this big, everyone say big? No, I mean big black guy walks up to my car while I'm at the stoplight. And when I say big, I'm talking like the big guy on the Green Mile big. I almost drove through the red light. And he looks at me, my window is up, and he says to me through the closed window, and I quote, "You need to get out of here. You are going to find yourself in a hurt of trouble if you don't." Could you imagine that happening? I could honestly tell that he was not threatening me, not at all, but was rather warning me. He pointed me towards the highway, and you want to know what? Zoom, zoom went the car. And I'm telling you also, guys, that experience left several deep impressions on me. Some good, but mostly bad. The reality is, guys, is when you hear people say scary things about East St. Louis, and then those scary things are followed up by daily news reports that you hear on the news every single morning of X number of people got shot and killed, there was violence, and all these horrible things on the east side of St. Louis. And then you make a handful of wrong turns and you see for yourself firsthand what can only be described as scary stuff. Guys, these perceptions cannot help but leave impressions. Is it right? Is it wrong? Does it happen? Are such impressions always and only bad? Can they be good? Is it even possible for things to not leave an impression? Now, guys, last week I began the sermon by saying, and I quote, "Things seem to be a real mess today." And then I followed it up further by saying, and I quote, "But we would do well. We would do well to also recognize that throughout history," and I mean this, throughout history, things have often, almost continually been a mess. Guys, it's true. It's true. And then we asked the question, why? Why is this the case? And the answer is very simple. Things are a mess because as humans, we live messy lives. We are prone to sin, and sin will always, absolutely, every single time, carry with it painful and messy consequences. Every single time. Every time. And the reality is, guys, none of us, everyone say none of us. Guys, the reality is none of us are without sin. Black people are not without sin, and neither are white people. Hispanic people, not without sin. Rich people are not without sin. Poor people, gay people, straight people, not without sin. And because we are prone to sin, every one of us, say it, every one of us, people are smart. They are smart to be at least a little bit guarded, a little bit hesitant, giving people, I hope, the benefit of the doubt while watching with perceiving eyes. I'll shoot straight with you guys. I feel horrible, absolutely horrible for those who live in East St. Louis. I wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want to live there. And I suspect that those who live there do live there because they can't afford to live anywhere else. Is there a lot of crime there in East St. Louis? Yeah. Yes. There's tons of crime. And who is committing all of this crime? Guys, I don't know. But I think I can say with certainty, with absolute certainty, that not everyone who lives in East St. Louis are criminals. And to make it worse, can you imagine living in East St. Louis? And can you imagine the response and the assumptions and the judgments of those when they learn where these people are from, where they live? But please don't tell me there are people who don't make the same kinds of assumptions and the same kind of judgments of those who live in the foothills of Appalachia. Or those who live in the quote-unquote, the pompous, snotty, stuck-up area of town. Guys, do you seriously think this does not go on all over the place in thousands, tens of thousands, if not millions of different ways? I feel bad. I feel horrible for the very, very kind, the very, very humble, the innocent girl that everyone assumes is stuck up. And as a result, no one wants anything to do with her. I feel bad for the young man who lives out in the sticks, whose girlfriend's parents don't want their daughter dating a quote-unquote hillbilly who will never amount to anything. I feel bad for the guy who can't afford to live anywhere else, and yet there is this huge, mammoth red flag every time a potential company sees the address where this fellow lives. And I feel bad for Johnny, the fellow who lives down on the other side of the tracks. Now, interestingly enough, as fate would fortunately have it, Jimmy and Johnny actually became friends. Very good friends, in fact. The summer after their junior year in high school, Jimmy and Johnny both ended up working for the same landscaper. And despite living on the bad side of town, it did not take long for the people who ended up working alongside with Johnny to realize that Johnny was nothing like the kind of person they assumed or judged he was. Amen. It's a shame. It's a shame, isn't it? Guys, do you agree with me? Is it a shame that people have assumptions? Amen. Yes, and also perhaps no. Guys, it would be great, it would be awesome, it would be wonderful if we could always assume that people are good. Nevertheless, I wouldn't ever want my mom walking down the sidewalks of East St. Louis alone, especially at night. Guys, in reality, it is impossible. Now listen to me. It is impossible to think that people will not ever make assumptions based on the millions and millions, the countless number of factors that are continually forming one's perceptions. It's unfortunate, but it is reality. And I think more so today than probably any other time in history. The real evil, though, guys, and listen to me. In fact, you can write this down. Guys, the real evil comes when people are not making distinctions. What? It's true. The real evil comes when people are not looking and making evaluations. The real evil comes when people are not being discriminate, not by the true definition of the word. Guys, one of the nicest guys that I met during my years at Greenville was a black guy by the name of Bill Brinson. I called Bill a couple of days ago and I reviewed what I'm getting ready to share with you to make sure that I remembered it well. And I asked his permission and he said, yeah, go for it. He was one of the nicest guys at Greenville College. Amy, you remember Bill. In fact, Bill lives on the far west side of Indianapolis now, and when I told Amy that we were going to get together with Bill and his wife, Amy was all tickled inside. One of the nicest guys that I met during Greenville College, Bill Brinson. In regards, though, to the way people perceived Bill, here's what I noticed. Here's what I noticed. This was back in 1988. I saw that there were people who at first seemed hesitant. They seemed hesitant about Bill. The truth is, there were not very many black people at Greenville back in 1988. I don't think there was probably a single black person who actually lived in the town of Greenville outside of those who went to the school. And there were only a handful of black people who went to the school. These people that I'm describing, these fellow students and the like, they were willing to get to know Bill somewhat, some of them. And those who truly did take the time and the energy and the effort to get to know him very quickly discovered that Bill was nice, he was an enjoyable guy, and he was as good as anyone they would ever meet anywhere in their lifespan. But I also saw those who just didn't really want anything to do with Bill. In other words, they did not want to take the time to look at the kind of person Bill was. They didn't want to make any distinctions regarding Bill or evaluations regarding Bill. They didn't want to discriminate the kind of person Bill was. In reality, they simply wrote Bill off. And they wrote him off because he was a black guy. Just plain and simple. And guys, to me, that is the truest definition of prejudice. But what blew my mind even more was Bill's response. Did Bill hate it because there were people who would treat him this way? Yeah, I don't think Bill was happy about it at all. But I remember Bill telling me something very profound. He said, Jeff, I get really frustrated when I see other black people, my fellow other black people, do stuff, often stupid stuff. It definitely makes it hard for me, and it makes it hard for other black people. And unless someone takes the time, and sets aside and is very intentional to take the time and the energy to truly get to know me, I can only imagine the speculations that they may have about me. And you think about that. Guys, it also may be very hard to realize this or to believe this, but I believe everyone, and I do mean everyone, is in this same boat. Everyone struggles with the issue of acceptance. Do you know what the hardest thing is for a 7th grader going to junior high school for the first time on the first day of school? You all know what it is because you struggled with the exact same thing. Oh my land, who am I going to sit with at lunchtime, and will I be accepted? But guys, the extent to which different ones have to face and deal with this problem, this issue that we're trying to describe today is of course going to vary. Of course it's going to vary. Rich person, poor person. Smart person, not so smart person. Good looking person, not so good looking person. Lived here for a long, long time, or new to the community. Young, old, beginning to figure that out, beginning to see that. Didn't realize the reality of that so much. Beginning to see it. Gay versus straight. North side, west side, south side, or the scary east side. Oh. Churchgoer or non-churchgoer. IU or Purdue. Who would have thought? But I'm telling you, it's a reality. Boy, you better believe it, especially in my neighborhood. It can be a reality. Country music or hip-hop. White collar or blue collar. Republican or Democrat. Guys, the bottom line is there are a lot of distinctions, and I mean a lot of distinctions between us, and yet all of us simply want the same thing: to be accepted, to be received, to be loved, not to be judged. Guys, listen to me. Cain was struggling. He was struggling. He was not doing well at all. And maybe it was because Cain was the older brother and then comes Abel. Or maybe it was because when Cain came up with this awesome idea of giving an offering to God, Abel had to steal his thunder by giving a better offering. Or maybe it was something totally different. Or maybe it was a combination of several things. But guys, as I said it before, I say it again, I really don't think it mattered. The fact was Cain was struggling. But then came God, filled with compassion for Cain. He came and he said to him these words: Cain, if you do what is right, will you not be what? Accepted. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? I don't know what it's like to be a black man. I don't know what it's like to be a Hispanic man. I don't know what it's like to... I guess I was kind of considered rich, snobby, pompous, maybe by some people. But I don't know. Because there were so... All I know is what it's like to be me. And I'll be honest with you, I found that that's not very easy in itself. And I can only imagine how much more difficult it is out there for others. Sin was crouching at Bill's door. Bill, the black guy from Greenville. But Bill did what was right. And was he accepted? Amy, was Bill accepted? Guys, Bill had as many friends as anyone probably ever had at Greenville. And those who did not accept him didn't deserve his friendship at all. Johnny could have been bitter. He could have been angry. He could have been a lot of different things, but he didn't. He was none of those things. He simply did what was right. He did what was right, and over time, and it's unfortunate and it's a bummer that it took so much time. All of us have burdens to carry. It's true, but over time, he was accepted. he was accepted. People came to recognize the person Johnny from the inside. It was the same for the hillbilly, the redneck, who eventually won the girl's dad's approval and married his high school sweetheart. Guys, the reality is I constantly hear, and I'm almost done, I promise you I'm really close to wrapping this up. But guys, I constantly hear, I wouldn't say it's every day, easily every single week, multiple times every week. I constantly hear from such a wide variety of people how they are so unfairly treated. And I suspect they're right. Each of them. All of them. Guys, it honestly does not matter who you are or whatever the situation is. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? In many circumstances, it may take longer. I get this. It's true. It may take longer for you to differentiate yourself from the people that they want to categorize you under. But if you do what is right in time, their assumptions and their judgments, well, you know what? They will either be disproven or they will be regrettably confirmed. And that has everything just to do with you. I wish that there was a faster way for things to get better. I wish there was a faster way for things to get healthier. But you want to know what? It can become faster. Things can become better more quickly. In the book of Psalms, you can write this down as well. It's in your bulletin. But in the book of Psalms, chapter 139, verses 23 and 24, it simply says this, and this is my prayer for myself and for all of us. Search me, God, search me, and know my heart, and test me, and know my anxious deeds, my thoughts. See if there is anything offensive. Say those words with me. See if there is anything offensive within me, and lead me into the way of everlasting. Guys, the problem isn't when we discriminate, not by the definition of the word. The problem is when we write people off and choose not to look at their character or what distinguishes them from others. The real evil, the heart of this problem is when we see their color or their nationality or their gender or whatever, and without looking closer, more closely, we choose to discard them. Nothing could be further from love. Regardless of the hurdles that you feel, and even as I look across, so many conversations come to my mind. But guys, regardless of the hurdle that you feel that's in front of you, do good. Just do good. Do what is right. Do everything well. Knowing in time, you will win over those who would seek to judge you. And if they don't deserve to know you. And number two, may we, every single one of us, may we likewise have wisdom, incredible wisdom, as we are slow to judge, but quick to search not what is on the exterior, but is within a person's heart. friends, Amy's going to pray for us. We've not had millions and millions of altar calls. Certainly not lately. But the altar is open. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask Randy to just for the sake of our own privacy, we'll shut off the transmission online. And those who would want to come to the altar to pray, you're welcome to come and pray. You have been presented an incredible, huge amount of information. 13 pages, guys, 13 pages. Normally my sermons are 5.5. I couldn't span this over 2 weeks. I had to say it all at one setting. And I believe that God has challenged us. And I think God has given us some perspectives that maybe we haven't thought about or considered perhaps in a long time. You're never going to be able, you will never, ever, do you church hear me, you will never, ever, ever, ever be able to control somebody else. What they think, what they say, what they will do. I have found that about myself. I cannot control what people do. For crying out loud, I have a hard enough time controlling what I do. But that's the goal, isn't it? We do what is right. We do what is good. We show love, God's love. We do it with wisdom. We do it with tact. And if people choose to discard us, judge us for whatever the millions and millions of reasons why somebody could possibly judge us or whatever, their loss, not ours, not ours. But may we be very, very careful. Because while we may be feeling that from others, there may be others who are feeling that about us. Amen? Let's stand together as we close our time. And Randy, go ahead and press the end transmission button. Those of you that are watching at home, you have a wonderful day.